Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with some news out of Fox. They are looking to expand their Friday package in college football this upcoming year, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll get into some QB rankings that came out from Chris Sims from the NBC. He had some very interesting rankings that have gone back and forth throughout the years, so I have some reactions to those. And then we have a couple of sequels coming up in the back end of the show. We have another edition of Biggest Questions going into spring. There are just so many that I could not fit them all into one segment. And then we got a repeat of breakout players on the offensive side of the ball for this upcoming season. So a ton ahead, a really great show for you all, but let's start with this. I want to remind you all that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see that on the screen and maybe we can have a fun back and forth throughout the show is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions and comments on the screen, and maybe I can comment on them and we can have a fun back and forth here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. All right, let's jump right in, why don't we? Because it's been a crazy time in college football. There's been a million things happening across conference realignment, transfer portal, coaches changes. Everything has been happening in the last couple of days, in the last couple of weeks. But this is one that I think everyone can get around. I think everyone can get behind this change that is coming soon. It looks like Fox is trying to increase their Friday package, and it looks like they are going to take the primetime slot on Fridays this season to show one of their premier games. It doesn't look like it's just going to be, usually in past years, the Friday game has been one of the lower level games in the grand scheme of things, but it looks like they're trying to bump up the profile of that game, bump up the ability to kind of monopolize Friday in the college football game. So these games apparently will be between the Big 12, the Big 10, and the Mountain West, and obviously the Big 10 and the Big 12 will be the major draws there, but there's some Mountain West teams that'll be plenty fun to watch, and I'll get into those a little bit later. But the schedule for these games seems to be a little bit up in the air. The networks meet in May to kind of decide who gets what time slot, all of the logistics of how everything gets put into place on the TV schedules. So it'll be interesting to see what games actually get put in those positions and how often we get, the Big 10 and the Big 12 in those positions, because I think if you ask the conference commissioners in both those sports, they'd like their teams to play on Saturdays, but at the end of the day, if you can get a standalone slot on a primetime game, I don't think you'd turn your nose up at that by any means. So I think Fox, they had said that their hope in all of this is to kind of dominate the football weekend. As we know, they have Big Noon Kickoff on Saturday, which is a huge draw for so many people. And then on Sunday, they kind of dominate the NFL game. They have the game of the week for the most part pretty much every single week. They have, incredible amounts of games on Fox, them and CBS splitting most of the responsibilities on Sundays. So if this were to pass and they were able to put, let's say, Michigan State UCLA game or Arizona Texas Tech or whatever it is, being able to put those games in that Friday slot will give them, you're watching Fox on Friday night and then you're waking up and watching Fox at noon to watch Big Noon Kickoff, and then right on Sunday, you're right back at your seat watching Fox at 1 o'clock. So the Fox is obviously trying to expand their football coverage and kind of, in the grand scheme of things, probably, shorten the gap between them and ESPN when it comes to overall broadcast of sports overall, but especially football. I think Fox is really starting to chip away at ESPN in that respect. And the funny thing, or the interesting thing about this change, is it doesn't look like this is going to be just another game. It sounds like they are going to make this slot one of their main slots for the weekend. So whether that's the number 2 game that they have under their umbrella, or number 3 or number 4, I don't know. But it looks like this is going to be a game that everyone's going to want to watch. So it's a very interesting thing, and it has a lot of A lot of pros and cons. Obviously, some of the cons are, people like to do things on Friday night, so you might lose some of the viewership there. You will have to convince teams to do some short weeks and things of that nature. But the pro, I think, really outweighs the con, where you have people like me and people like, I'm sure, a lot of you that just want to watch college football at all times, every single day throughout the year. So a Friday game that I'd love to tune into doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world to me. But the Friday games took over, really. This has kind of become a thing because WWE SmackDown, which used to be on that time slot in Fox, has made its way to the USA Network. So they needed a replacement, and they felt like college football would be a great way to do that. They do think that this will increase their viewership, which makes sense, but also WWE is year-round, and this is only for part of the year, so it'll be interesting to see if how they fill that slot in the meantime, but also do the numbers actually back what they're saying, and we'll get more viewership in this 13-week pocket than we would get the entire year for WWE. I think it would be very interesting to see those numbers towards the end of the football season. But I think Friday games, obviously, there's been a lot in the opening weekends of the year. There's been some on Thanksgiving. They're kind of interspersed throughout the year, but have never really been the main event, right? Everyone's looking forward to Saturday. Everyone's trying to get involved on Saturday, and that's kind of the day that everyone looks forward to. But at the end of the day, I think there's a ton of really good things that can come out of this. I think especially for conferences like the Mountain West or even the Big 12 in some scenarios, I think having those teams on a bigger display, on a primetime slot every week will definitely help them in terms of just getting their name out there and being a part of the college football conversation, with the SEC and the Big Ten kind of monopolizing a lot of the college football game as we know it. But I think this, at the very least, helps the Big Ten, or the Big 12, excuse me, and the Mountain West stay in the conversation, stay a part of the game, and have at least a lot of people watching them on Friday nights. So, and this is not a new thing for any of these conferences or any of these teams necessarily. The Big Ten has had a limited Friday package since 2017, mostly on the Big Ten Network, or FS1, so not necessarily on the Big Fox Network, which will be a massive upgrade. The Big 12 has had 3 night games on ESPN throughout last season, so they're no strangers to it at all. And then the Mountain West had a number on CBS Sports Network, along with 2 on FS1. So none of this is new to these conferences. These are the conferences that tend to play Friday games. The ACC dabbles a little bit. I don't know if the SEC plays a ton of Friday games. They might play none, but these are conferences that are used to that kind of schedule and can kind of adapt to that quicker than others. So I really think this is something that everyone's going to end up loving. I don't think anyone is going to be too upset with being able to fill more of your time with really high-level football. But there are downfalls, right? Some people don't love the idea of having to give up a Friday night to watch a game, or things of that nature. But for me, it's not a big hurdle by any means. So I'm very excited about this. I think, especially with it being possibly the second biggest or third biggest matchup throughout the year, or throughout that week. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's going to be awesome. It's probably going to be Jason Benetti and Brock Heward on the call, because they tend to be the second group in the Fox rankings, right after the incomparable Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, one of the best duos in the game. So I love Jason Benetti. I love Brock Heward. I think they're a great team, and I think if you do have that second game, it'll be a perfect, appetizer going into the week, a perfect thing to get everyone in the football mood, and also it just expands the number of days in a week that we get to watch high-level football. So I'm not mad by that in any sense of the word. But one of the bigger reasonings for this, I'm sure, is Fox is constantly in a fight with ESPN. I think we all know that those are the top two dogs when it comes to sports broadcasting, and those are the people that continue to kind of battle with each other for the biggest shows, the biggest viewership, all of that type of stuff. And obviously, ESPN has been top billing for a very long time. They've been the go-to for pretty much every sport, pretty much every breakdown, every TV show. They've been the godfather in all of this for a very long time. But Fox has really been heating up over the last couple of years, whether that's the shows that they have on a daily basis on their networks becoming much more popular, with Undisputed and things of that nature, or things like this just being a bigger part of the college football landscape and the NFL landscape. I think Big Noon Kickoff has really taken off over the past couple of years, as more and more people have become a little bit disenthused by the new direction of College Game Day. I think more and more people have been tuning over to Big Noon Kickoff. So Fox has a lot of momentum in a lot of different areas with that battle against ESPN, and obviously it's a big hill to climb, but I think this is something that is a relatively easy change to make and relatively quick, and I think will help their brand incredibly, and will at the very least bring more people to Fox and bring more people to these other conferences, especially the Mountain West. And I know when you think about, it's going to be Big 12, Big 10, or Mountain West, you're thinking, okay, so whenever it's Mountain West, I'll go ahead and tune out and do my normal Friday activities. But I will say the Mountain West is going to be a ton of fun next year. I think one of the teams that a lot of people were not expecting to burst onto the scene but did a year ago is UNLV. They were in the Mountain West Championship, which no one thought they were going to be able to get to. And then Boise State is inviting Malachi Nelson into the mix, coming from USC, was a uber talented kid coming out of high school, and things just didn't work at USC. It looked like he was a little bit further from starting than people had envisioned when he made his commitment to USC and got on campus. So he found his way to Boise State. I think it's a good situation for him to show off his ability. And as we know in today's college football, you can play a lot of places and still find your way to the next level. So Malachi Nelson, the journey is not over for him by any means, just because he took a minor step down going to Boise State. So I'll definitely be tuning in whenever those teams are on. And then the San Jose State, there's tons of other teams that definitely deserve this spot, and I'm very excited that I'm good to be able to watch a little bit more Mountain West football. That's always a fun thing to deal with. So ton to like about this. I think it's very possible that ESPN tries to counter with their own Friday night game, try to boost up their Friday night footprint to kind of go off of this to kind of counter this move. But who knows? I think at the end of the day, this is a great thing for everyone. I think obviously it's one less game on Saturday, but I don't think anyone would argue with the idea that Saturday is a lot of games to keep track of. So taking one off the plate necessarily wouldn't be the worst thing in the world in my eyes. So very excited about that change. It obviously will be interesting to see what exact games we get and how much of a move this is, because that is where all of that will be defined. But for the time being, I'm very excited about this change. I think it brings a totally new setup to the schedule of college football and gets me watching college football earlier in the week. So I have no problems about that by any means. But we're going to take a little break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into some quarterback rankings. Chris Sims released his rankings for the top 6 guys in this upcoming draft class, and I have some thoughts. So when we come back, we will get into all of that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the differences that Fox is making to their broadcasting of college football in the fall. It looks like they're going to go towards a more pronounced Friday day with a bigger game on the Fridays leading up to the Saturday of college football. So I'm a big fan, but I'm sure there are a lot of people that aren't quite as big a fan, so let me know what you think in the comments. But let's jump into segment 2. Actually, before we jump into segment 2, I want to remind you all that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help to us here at the network, but to you all as well to see your questions come across the screen. We can have a fun back and forth and maybe get into a little conversation here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Alrighty, let's jump into Chris Sims' quarterback rankings. Chris Sims has been one of the biggest names in NFL draft coverage for quite some time. He's been a huge guy that people look at when it comes to quarterback rankings and things of that nature because he played the position. He was a former quarterback at Texas. Was in the NFL for some time, and then is now a reporter at NBC, and every year he releases his rankings for the quarterbacks going into this draft, and he's had some up and down rankings. I don't think there's any argument about that, but for the most part, he hits on a pretty high clip. He had C.J. Stroud in a tier of his own a year ago, which is obviously what happened, and then the year before that, he did have Matt Corral up top, which is a little bit different, but that was a weird class with Sam Howell kind of leading the way as of right now, and Brock Purdy, I guess. So I don't think anyone really got that one right. And then even going back further, he had Lamar excuse me, sorry, dealing with a little bit of a sore throat here, but Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, he had above Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold in 2018. That has obviously come through. And then he had Patrick Mahomes as the top guy in 2017. So definitely a lot of good rankings. Obviously some ones that he's missed on, but a very smart guy that obviously knows the position. So let's jump into his rankings this year. Caleb Williams, I think everyone has him up top, but he has him in a tier of his own. He thinks he is a transcendent type of guy and one of the best quarterback prospects that he's seen covering football. He thinks he can do a number of things that quarterbacks normally can't do. So he is in a kind of tier of his own up top. And then you get to tier 2 and it's Jaden Daniels. And the way he put this tier would be number 1 in other years, which makes sense. I think there's a number of years where Jaden Daniels would have gone number 1 and people wouldn't have thought two times about it. Obviously, coming off the Heisman season helps him a lot, but everything is right where it needs to be when Jaden Daniels goes through his mechanics and goes through his progressions. His mechanical footwork is flawless, according to Chris Sims, and I tend to agree. The dude just, everything in his throwing motion is absolutely beautiful, so I totally understand that. 2-3 is where things get a little bit off the rails, in my opinion. Tier 3, he has as franchise starting quarterbacks, and he has Bo Nix at 3, Michael Penix at 4, and then J.J. McCarthy at 5. He said he loves Bo Nix's frame and ability to create off schedule, which I do too. He's remarkable in that sense. He said Michael Penix's in-pocket ability is probably as good as anyone in the entire draft, which is absolutely true. And then he said JJ has a ton of tools, can throw from different arm angles, has a really strong arm that I think a lot of people don't necessarily notice when seeing him for the first time, but it is pretty. He has a lot of arm talent and a lot of arm strength to go behind that. So those three guys fall into his franchise starting quarterback role. I'll get into why I don't necessarily agree with him on that, but let's finish out his rankings. Tier 4, he has talented projects, and is Drake May. Drake May, he said there are some mechanical issues that need to be fixed before he can jump into the league and start. So he thinks the best thing for him would to be sit behind a talented veteran that can kind of teach him the ways, teach him especially in the footwork aspect of things. If he can tighten up those things, then maybe down the road he can be a starter. But for the time being, he thinks that sitting would be the best thing for Drake May. So these have obviously a lot of different takes that people don't necessarily agree with. A lot of people have Drake May right up there with the big dogs of Caleb Williams and Jane Daniels. A lot of people, have J.J. McCarthy right up there with him as well. A lot of people love Michael Penix. A lot of people don't love Michael Penix. So there's a lot of dissension on all of this type of stuff. I think there's a ton of different ways you can rank these guys, because the way I look at it, all of these guys have different strengths, all of these guys have different ability, and all of these guys have the ability to be successful at the next level. But as we know, it's not quite as easy as it seems in going through combine work and up till draft day. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of comes to fruition. But as for my major takeaways from these 6 rankings of these 6 guys, there's almost no way there will be 5 franchise quarterbacks in this draft. I think there are a lot of really, really talented guys in this draft, and the ability is off the charts for some of these guys. But if this was a 5 franchise quarterback draft, it would be the best quarterback draft probably of all time. I think everyone would be stunned if 5 of these guys ended up being genuine franchise quarterbacks in the future. If history has any validity to it, it looks like it'll probably be 1 to 2 guys. I think there are 2 in particular that I think have the ability to transform a franchise. I think the rest of the guys have a little bit of a thinner road, I guess is the way to say it, to be the franchise guy. So before I jump into my rankings, I do want to say, excuse me, I do apologize. My throat is very stuffed up today. But before I jump into my rankings of these guys, there are a number of different ways to put these guys. I don't think there's any right way to do it necessarily. There's so many different body types and abilities and play types that it depends on what you value the most and what you like the most. So all of this will be a little bit different than maybe what you have, and I'd love to hear what you all have in the comments here, but definitely keep that in mind as we go throughout this. But let's start in Tier 1. Tier 1 to me is Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. I know there are a lot of people that, including Chris Sims, that have Caleb Williams alone up top, and I totally get that. His ability to create off balance and off schedule is just remarkable. But when I look at it, I think Caleb Williams has all the talent in the world, has all the ability in the world. I think Jaden Daniels is just slightly more polished when you're talking about in-pocket passing and going through the normal progressions that need to go through. So I think both these guys are remarkable in and out of the pocket. Both these guys are remarkable on and off schedule, on and off balance. They can make some wild plays, but I don't see much separating these guys, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think there's anything that Caleb Williams does that is marketably better than Jaden Daniels. So I kind of have them as 1A, 1B. I think I could rank them either way, if I'm being totally honest. I think both these guys are remarkably talented. I think whoever ends up getting them is getting not only a guy that can transform your franchise on the field, but I also do think, I know there is some question marks around Caleb Williams, but I do think both these guys are genuine leaders. I think they can handle whatever is going to be thrown at them. And although there are some not so nice things being said about Caleb Williams throughout this process, I think he has a good head on his shoulders. He knows what he's doing, especially when it comes to locker rooms and on the field. So I wouldn't worry too much about him. But if you're looking for that classic leader of sorts that people always talk about in locker rooms, I think Jaden Daniels fits that mold just a little bit better. But I think the margins between these guys are so thin. So I think they're right around each other. And then tier 2 for me is kind of possible franchise guys. Two guys that I think have all the ability in the world, but might need a good situation for all of this to come to fruition. So let's start with Drake May at 3. He is someone that has every tool in the world. There is not a thing on a football field that Drake May can't do. Obviously not necessarily a remarkable runner like Jaden Daniels or one of these other guys, but he has ability. There's no two ways about that. He can do a number of things with the ball that not a lot of people on planet Earth can do. So Drake May, I really, really like. I think he has a ton of ability, but there is a little bit of worry about, his turnover issues and kind of forcing the ball at times and being that superhero that you don't really have to be at the NFL level. Sometimes in college when maybe your offensive line isn't quite as talented or the receivers you're playing with aren't quite as talented like Drake May was in a lot of cases. It could be that he had to force sometimes in college, and maybe it's not a problem at the next level, but it is something I keep my eye on because it could become a big problem if he continues to kind of create for himself when he doesn't really need to, I guess is the best way to put it. And then for at the 4 position, I have J.J. McCarthy, much like a lot of people. I think this one to me is just betting on a bunch of traits. There are a ton of things to like from J.J. McCarthy when you look at his tape. I think obviously not the volume passer that people love to get because you're going to be asked to do a lot of things in an NFL game that J.J. McCarthy wasn't necessarily asked to do at Michigan. So there's going to be some things that he's going to have to kind of wrap his head around and get used to, but at the end of the day, has a ton of arm strength, has a ton of arm talent like Chris Sims talked about, and can make plays with his legs, which is something you don't necessarily always say about someone coming straight into the league and someone that in college was not necessarily the biggest running threat, definitely created with his legs when he needed to, but he's someone that I think is uber athletic, can do a number of different things, but in my eyes, both of these guys would very much benefit from having a veteran in front of them for maybe a year or two, learning the ropes, getting everything down to a T, and then putting them out in the field and letting them do their thing, whether that's with the Commanders or the Steelers or any of these teams, I think would benefit from having these two guys, and at the very least, letting them develop under a veteran, and I think if you do that and you garner these guys the right way, they can really shine. It's just going to take a little bit more time for these guys. And then tier 3 is kind of a weird one. I tend to believe that those 4 guys up top are, I don't want to say the only guys that have a real chance to be a franchise guy, because I think these next 2 guys have a real shot, but those are the guys that I would put any money on to be a franchise starting quarterback for a long time, because after this it gets a little bit more sketchy. So in my tier 3, I have 2 guys that I think have the ability, have a ton of things that you have to like as an NFL guy, but there are still a ton of question marks, and I think it would have to be kind of a Brock Purdy, San Fran situation where the system fits the guy to such a degree that they are going to succeed if these guys are going to be long-term NFL quarterbacks. But they could always prove me wrong, of course. But these 2 guys, in 5, I have Bo Nix, and then 6, I have Michael Penix. So a little bit of a flip from what most people have. I think most people have Penix above Nix at this point, but the way I look at it is if I'm going to draft a young quarterback and I'm going to put him in a position to start, even in his second or third year, I need him to be able to create off schedule. I need him to be able to get out, evade a rush, get to the open part of the field, and then make a throw. Michael Penix is remarkable inside the pocket. He does incredible things with the ball and can spin it as well as anyone in the entire draft class, but when he leaves the pocket, or if he can even get out of the pocket, it gets a little bit more sketchy for him. So I tend to value Bo Nix's athletic ability because I think the passing gap is not necessarily as big between these two as the athleticism and the running gap between Bo Nix and Michael Penix. So I tend to lean Bo Nix, but again, I think these are two guys that, unless they're drafted into very, very good situations and have tons of talent around them and a great play caller, I wouldn't necessarily bet on these guys to be franchise guys. But at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, this is a very talented group. There are tons of guys that have ability. There are tons of guys that could be franchise quarterbacks and make me look kind of dumb. But out of these 6 guys, I think any number of them could. Any combination of those 6 guys could, make their impact early and, be on that remarkable track that guys like C.J. Stroud and Brock Purdy are on. But in my eyes, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels just stand above everyone else. I think they have the ability to walk into a franchise and everything changes pretty much the second they walk in the door. So, although, it's very unlikely that even both these guys hit because it's usually just one guy per draft, but I think these are the 2 guys that will kind of set your franchise off on a different path than it's on right now. So whoever drafts them, whether it's the Bears or the Commanders or the Patriots, I've seen the Falcons trade up a million different options for these guys, but wherever they go, I think the team is going to be really happy to have them on and off the field. So I really like those guys. We will definitely revisit these after they get drafted to see what the fit is and see maybe these tiers change. Maybe Bo Nix and Michael Penix are drafted into perfect situations and I bump them up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this goes down, but we will definitely revisit those. But for the time being, I think it's Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, and pretty much everyone else in this draft class. But we're going to take a little break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk some spring questions. We got into it yesterday a little bit, and my mind was still rolling after the show, so I had to get a couple more out there. I have 5 questions that we will go into right after the break, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Chris Sims released his quarterback rankings for this upcoming draft class. I gave my rankings, so definitely checked out that segment. But let's jump into some more spring questions because I got done with yesterday's show and had a million more questions that popped into my head. So we're going to keep this train rolling and probably add a part 3 at some point. But as for right now, let's get into part 2. And let's start up north in Ann Arbor because Michigan is going through as much change as anyone. I think Bama might be the only team that has them beat, and it's very close, I'll be totally honest. Losing Jim Harbaugh, obviously, and Sharon Moore taking over is a massive change. Not only in, who's leading the charge, but I'm sure the energy is just a little bit different. Sharon Moore is cut from the same cloth, so I'm sure there is a lot of similarities between him and Jim Harbaugh, but there are definitely things that divide them. There are definitely things that they go about different business a little bit different, so it'll be interesting to see how all of that kind of shows itself throughout spring. But let's get into all of the changes that are happening in the staff and the team because so many guys are off to the NFL. They had 18 guys invited to the combine, the most a team has sent since 2003. So they got a lot of holes that they need to fill very, very quickly. And then the defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, special teams coordinator, John's brother, Jay Harbaugh, is off to Seattle. Jesse Minter joined Harbaugh in LA. And then, honestly, who I think are the two most important losses in this group are the D-line coach Mike Elston finding his way to LA with Jim Harbaugh as well. And then another guy heading over to LA is Ben Herbert, who is the strength and conditioning coach at Michigan. A lot of people, don't know the names of strength and conditioning coaches, and you probably shouldn't. There are a lot of guys that are a little bit more under the radar. There are a lot of guys that don't want to be over the radar. They don't want to be super well known outside of the industry and by fans, but a lot of strength coaches are the absolute lifeblood of programs. They make these players as tough as can be because there are a lot of aggressive strength coaches. Let's put it that way. There are some incredible guys at the level of college football. Scott Cochran was an incredible guy, no longer on the staff at UGA, but was a remarkable strength and conditioning coach during his time in Georgia and at Alabama prior. Torrey Becton, the strength coach at Texas, has gotten a ton of praise over the last couple of years as they've started to develop talent and just look different on Saturdays. So strength coaches are everything to programs. If you don't have a good strength coach, you're going to have a really hard time winning games, and Michigan had one of the best ones in the game in Ben Herbert. So that's a huge guy to replace, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any difference in the way that Michigan plays because of it, because a lot of the aggression, a lot of the anger, a lot of the energy came from those weight rooms and Ben Herbert. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that kind of comes to fruition. But for the guys that are coming in to replace him, the guys that need to be huge for him, Wink Martindale coming in as the defensive coordinator from the NFL ranks, a very interesting hire. When I saw it come across my feed, I was shocked. My eyes were wide open, but obviously a guy that knows football and can get that defense at least playing up to really good levels. I don't know if they're going to be quite as dominant as past years, but we'll see. Obviously a guy that understands football more than most of us in the world. And then Alex Orji taking over under center. I think there is going to be a ton of changes on the defensive side of the ball. If Alex Orji can hit under center, I think there's going to be a ton to like about this Michigan team. And then the guys coming back, Will Johnson on the defensive side of the ball, he needs to be locked down. Across every week, he needs to be as aggressive and as good of a corner as he usually is, because they're going to deal with some dudes at the wide receiver position. There's no two ways about that. And then Donovan Edwards on the offensive side of the ball is a huge get for their run game. I think the O-line has a ton to replace, but if they can get Donovan Edwards and Alex Orji on the same page in the run game, it's going to be really hard to stop that team. I just got a live comment talking about Arch Manning not signing up for NCAA 25. I think it's a non-story. That is what I'll say about that. But let's continue on here. We got Lincoln Riley is dealing with a quite the flip in attitude out there at USC. As we've known throughout his career, there has been some troubles. There has been some problems with his defensive intensity and overall just his team's intensity and toughness throughout his time at Oklahoma and now at USC. I think one of the big things that needed to change and did change was he fired DC Alex Grinch, hired DeAnton Lynn, who was at UCLA for the past couple of years. And if you watch any UCLA football, you know that was a very hard-nosed team. You know that was a team that was going to punch you in the teeth pretty much every Saturday. So definitely a step up in terms of what the pass looks like for their defense, and their defensive coordinator in particular. But we don't really know what's going to happen until the field comes into play. And I think spring practice probably will not fully answer this question. Obviously, we will not necessarily know what Alex Grinch or what this new defense looks like, what this new team looks like until football is starting to play. And we might not know for, a year while all of this kind of flips in Lincoln Riley's mind. But I do think this flip is going to be really important to the way the rest of the career goes for Lincoln Riley, because if it doesn't go well, if he can't flip that switch and become more hard-nosed, I think he could just be another really good coach for a time that never got over the hump. But if he can nail this and kind of make his team tougher and more hard-nosed, I wouldn't be surprised if Lincoln Riley was winning titles in the next 5 years. So a lot riding on this offseason and this upcoming year for USC and Lincoln Riley for sure. And then let's get into some transfer quarterbacks, because there is a ton of guys going a ton of different places. And let's try to figure out who's going to have the biggest impact. I think, obviously, Will Howard going to Ohio State, Riley Leonard going to Notre Dame, Cam Ward going to Miami, all huge for those teams. I think they have a ton on their shoulders to get those teams over the hump, because all of those teams, at the very least, have aspirations to compete for their conference, and these quarterbacks are going to have to hit for that to happen. So there are a lot of very interesting things to watch with these guys. Cam Ward looks very comfortable early on at Miami. There have been some incredible videos of Xavier Restrepo making mind-boggling catches, and Jacoby George being awesome in every way, the way he is. But there are some under-radar guys that still, can make a huge difference. Mainly above them, Malik Murphy at Duke is doing an incredible job. I think he's someone that a lot of people, knew the story. They knew that he was the backup at Texas for a long time, kind of stuck with it when Quinn Ewers came along, but wasn't getting his shot. I don't think anyone expected him necessarily to take over the starting job there, but can play football, that's for sure. He can sling the ball, can throw the ball probably a million miles an hour. Honestly, he has one of the biggest arms I've seen, and him going to Duke gives him a chance to be on the center stage, right? He can be the starter throughout spring and into the 2024 season. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops, and maybe Duke can kind of continue this underdog story that they've kind of developed over the Mike Elko era and now into the Manny Diaz era. I talked about Riley Leonard. If Notre Dame's going to succeed, they have to hit on Riley Leonard. Sam Hartman was good a year ago. There was not necessarily as many weapons around him as he would have hoped, I think, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But he's someone that just has to hit. DJ Uiagalelei the same way. He has huge shoes to fill with Jordan Travis, huge things to live up to on and off the field. But spring will give us a great idea if he's up for that task, if the teammates are responding to him, all of that type of stuff. But so many guys to watch throughout the spring. Obviously, we will not know everything until we get into actual games and we see these guys getting hit a little bit. But at the end of the day, there are a ton of talented quarterbacks going all over the place, and spring will give us an idea of if these guys are going to hit or if they're going to flop like some other transfer quarterbacks in the past. But let's jump into two teams that are leading the way in the SEC, Georgia and Texas. And let's start with Georgia. There are a ton of guys leaving that defensive backfield, and that is something that is not easy to replace, I'll be honest. There are a ton of guys on that team that are remarkably talented, but the guys that are leaving are as smart and good of football players as you can imagine. Let's start with Kamari Lassiter, a lockdown corner, makes incredible plays, is one of those guys that can track the ball just remarkably well and get his hands in the wide receiver's hands and kind of break up passes after the fact. Just remarkable concentration from him. So guys like Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey, who bounced in and out of the portal like it was a game, but is at UGA. And then freshman Ellis Robinson III. All those guys need to be huge because it's going to be a little bit more of a rotation situation instead of one guy holding down a spot and then kind of expanding from there. So I think this is going to be a ton of very, very good players in this group. I think there are a ton of guys that can really step up for some guys that definitely miss some time and are leaving the program and huge shoes to fill. And then the safeties, Tyke Smith and Javon Bullard, both remarkably experienced, both incredibly talented and can do a number of really good things, but also the energy and the leadership that they brought is second to none on this team. So huge shoes to fill. I think Janelle Aguero, and KJ Bolden, the freshman coming in, are going to be huge for that. Malachi Starks in the back end makes this a little bit easier on Georgia for sure, but still a ton of holes to fill. But adding Charvarius Robinson from Alabama is as good as it gets when you're trying to, replace a ton of talent on the back end. His ability to get the most out of safeties and corners the same is just remarkable. So he's going to have to get some young guys to play really, really good ball early on. And overall, Georgia should be okay. I think when we look at this team, the talent is always going to be there. There's no two ways about that. But the thing is, they're going to have to play elite football. They're going to face a lot of really good passing attacks, mainly Texas when they go to Austin. And if that back end is not locked up and really tight, it could be a tough day for them. So although I think there's a ton of talent there is a ton of youth. So we'll see how that develops throughout the spring and which guys kind of take those starter spots. And then finally, let's get into Texas. Tons of pass catchers went out the door for Texas, and they showed out at the combine, so we know that they are huge losses for this team. Xavier Worthy, obviously, one of the most productive wide receivers in Texas history throughout his 3 years there. JT Sanders, the same with tight ends. He was as productive as pretty much any tight end in Texas history. And then Adonai Mitchell joining his senior year was the perfect addition to this team, brought a ton of good out of him and everyone around him. And then Jordan Whittington, as smart of a receiver as there is, a guy that made a ton of game-changing plays, including getting a fumble back after a pick against TCU that saved that game, if you're watching that game. So a ton of guys out the door. There was a portion of the offseason early on where they only had 8 total catches returning in the entire wide receiver room. So that needed to change, and Sark did a ton to change that. It started with Matthew Golden coming over from Houston, then Isaiah Bond from Alabama, and then finally Silas Bolden from Oregon. All of those guys are very experienced, all have a ton of catches to their name, so that's not a problem anymore. And I think all of them have the ability to really be game changers. But at the end of the day, you have to get them on the same page as Quinn Ewers, because if you don't, it could be a long year with a lot of confusion, a lot of missed passes, a lot of people getting what they want in some cases, with Texas going over to the SEC. And then on the tight end position, Amari Niblack coming over from Bama is huge. I think he helps fill kind of the Sanders role in terms of pass catching ability and downfield threat. And then you have Gunnar Helm as well to kind of help out with blocking and the underneath routes as much as possible. So I think they did a great job replacing the pass catchers. It obviously was not going to be perfect, and there's still a lot up in the air, but spring will give us an idea of what this new group looks like. So we'll definitely be revisiting those. Drop any questions you have in the comments, because there are so many going into this spring. There's so many changes to watch and so many different things to talk about that I'm sure I forgot some. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do another part 2. We're going to do a part 2 of breakout players on the offensive side of the ball for 2024. Some great guys to watch, and some guys maybe you know the name of, maybe you don't, but you definitely will towards the end of next season. So stick with us, and we will be right back. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the questions going into spring. There are a ton of them. There are so many things that we are going to be watching throughout spring and definitely updating you all on. But now it's time for another part 2. We have some breakout players for 2024. There are so many guys I could get to, but we're going to go through all the positions and give you a couple of guys to watch. And we'll start with quarterbacks. We got a big guy here because this is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the entire country. He just hasn't been able to play a lot of football because he's been stuck behind some remarkable quarterbacks. It is Garrett Nussmeier, the quarterback at LSU. Replacing Jaden Daniels is a tough task. There's no two ways about that. But if you're looking for someone that fully understands the offense, that can put a ball pretty much wherever he needs to on a rope, that can do a number of remarkable things, they did a great job with Garrett Nussmeier because there's very few people on planet Earth that know what LSU wants to do more than Garrett Nussmeier because it feels like he's been there forever. But he is finally the starter. He finally is going into spring knowing he's the guy, which is huge for quarterbacks. I think it's bigger than some people even realize. So tons to really look forward to with this kid. But you won't really know until he gets, that big time minutes that a lot of people are looking forward for him to get. But for him, a little bit more of a pocket passer than Jaden Daniels for sure. He is going to be more stuck in that position, kind of releasing balls from the pocket, and they're going to have to put him in really good positions for him to succeed early on. But he can extend plays. He does have athletic ability, can get out of the pocket and make something happen. So he's not necessarily immobile by any means, but the pocket is where he's most comfortable, and slinging balls out is what he does best. But he'll have tons of guys to work with. Kyron Lacey is the guy that I'm really watching, another breakout player that we definitely could have included in this. And then CJ Daniels came over from Liberty, a super productive guy. And then Chris Hilton is a very fun wide receiver that I think is going to play a huge part in their offense. A little bit more of a deep threat for this team, so very excited to see what he can do this year. And the guy right next to him is probably going to be Josh Williams. He kind of broke out onto the scene a year ago at running back, but having him next to Garrett Nussmeier, a very smart, experienced back that can do a number of things. So you got to love having that guy next to you if you're a first-time starter like Garrett Nussmeier. I tend to think Garrett Nussmeier will be a top 5 quarterback in the SEC at the end of the year. I don't think there are a lot of people that would currently rank him there, and I probably wouldn't just because I haven't seen enough. But I think once we get to the end of the season, he's going to make some jaw-dropping plays. I think he has arm talent and ability that reminds me a little bit of Carson Beck over at Georgia, where he can make pretty much any throw from the pocket, can extend plays when needed, but if you give him any window, he can put it into it. So I'm very excited to see what he can do. I think he's someone that LSU is incredibly excited for, and they should be, because, man, can the dude play. But let's get to some running backs, and let's start with Jordan James up at Oregon. Bucky Irving is out the door. So Jordan James right into the starting lineup, right into the main running back role, and he has played plenty of football. He had a little bit over 700 yards and 11 rushing touchdowns a year ago, so he is not new to the field by any means, but Bucky Irving was the guy. He was the number one guy, whether it was run sets, pass sets. He was always on the field, it felt like. And then Jordan James got some short yardage, that type of stuff. But Jordan James is plenty talented. He can do a number of really remarkable things. And I think one of the real benefits to him going into this year, Dylan Gabriel coming back is huge. Or Dylan Gabriel joining is huge because when Bo Nix left, a huge part of that offense was keeping defenses honest because Bo Nix has the ability to run. He can extend plays and make it really hard on linebackers that overcommit to the running back or ends that overcommit to the running back. Dylan Gabriel's really no different. He's not necessarily quite as fast or athletic as Bo Nix, but the run game is no joke with Dylan Gabriel. He is someone that can execute it really, really well, so I would not be surprised if he garnered as much respect from defenses as Bo Nix did a year ago and opened some running lanes for Jordan James. Oregon is replacing 2 interior offensive linemen. mainly their center, Jackson Powers-Johnson, who will likely be the number one center off the board in the NFL draft because he's just remarkable. So replacing those is going to be tough, but they do have a ton of experience on that line. Are starting a redshirt freshman, it seems, at center, but other than that, there's tons of guys that are returning. So I think Jordan James is someone that could absolutely break out and have a Bucky Irving type year next year. And then a running back down in Miami in Coral Gables is Mark Fletcher Jr. Coming off his freshman year, the dude is an absolute beast. He is a specimen of a human being, but I really think he might be the best running back in all of the ACC this year with Will Shipley and Trey Benson moving on to the NFL. The door's wide open, right? He had a little bit over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns a year ago. The 2 games where he kind of got the bulk of that was he had 115 rushing against NC State, and then he had 126 and 2 touchdowns against Louisville later in the season. So the late part of the season was really where he started to kind of get up to pace, which is the case for a lot of young players in college football. And I think having Cam Ward next to him, much like Dillon Gabriel with Jordan James, it keeps defenses honest because Cam Ward, as we know, can do a ton of incredible things off schedule and with his legs. So I would be nervous if I was an edge rusher or a linebacker facing this team because you can't leave either of these guys open, and you might just have to on some plays. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. And then 2 genuine deep threats in Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George. Jacoby George a little bit more of, that deep threat stretching the defense, but Xavier Restrepo, as we've seen in some of the practice videos, can make his fair share of plays downfield. So having 2 of those guys just helps spread out the defense. And if you can spread out the defense, you can do a number of things on offense, especially with Mark Fletcher as your running back. So very excited to see what he can do. Another guy that is kind of stepping up into very big shoes is Oscar Delp, the tight end at UGA. Brock Bowers is impossible to replace. There is no one that is Brock Bowers. I've never seen anything like it at any position. I'll be totally honest, especially tight end. Just remarkable in so many different ways. And Delp is remarkable in so many ways as well, but Brock Bowers is different. Let's just put it that way. But I do think Oscar Delp is going to shock a lot of people. He does remarkable things in the run game and the pass game. Probably a better blocker than Brock Bowers was. Almost definitely a better blocker than Brock Bowers was, but him in the pass game is no slouch at all. And I think adding Ben Urasek from Stanford, the remarkably talented tight end that has 1,000 career receiving yards, I think it helps Delp even more because those underneath routes are going to be even more open. The same way I talked about Texas and Amari Niblack and Gunnar Helm, I think the same diatribe can happen with Ben Urasek and Oscar Delp, where Oscar Delp kind of gets the underneath routes while Urasek kind of stretches the defense and opens up passing lanes for Oscar Delp in a lot of ways. So obviously huge amount of question marks with him because, hasn't played quite as much as you would have liked. But when you have someone like Brock Bowers, it's a little bit tougher to get other guys on the field. But he is a guy that won't necessarily show up on the stat sheet every single week with 5 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. But he's going to have incredible tape almost every single week. He's going to have really, really good tape that whether it's run blocking or finding the open spot in a pass game or just being a good teammate. I think he's going to do a number of things really well, and I think a lot of NFL teams will be falling in love with Oscar Delp come fall. But let's get to some wide receivers, why don't we? And 2 guys going into their second year in college, and let's start with Jonte Cook at Texas. We talked about the wide receiver room needing a ton of replacements, mainly for Xavier Worthy, and here it is. This is the guy that will likely be in that Xavier Worthy type role where you're catching the ball with a ton of green space in front of you, you're getting screens, you're getting end arounds, all the different things that Sark likes to do. This will be the guy that he does it with. And how I told you there were 8 catches left in that wide receiver room for a time after Worthy, AD, and Jordan Whittington left the room. They're all here. Jonte Cook had every single one of them. He had 136 yards receiving a year ago. I think Sark is going to use a lot more 4 wide receiver sets instead of using multiple tight ends or 11 personnel, which is something that he's loved a lot throughout his time at Texas. Now you have a ton of receivers to play around with. So I think there will be a little bit more rotation than some Texas fans are used to at the wide receiver position. I think there will be a ton more differences in personnel, and I think that will play into Jonte Cook's hand because when you get teams off balance, the space opens up, and when space opens up, guys with the speed of Jonte Cook tend to do really well. So Jonte Cook is someone that I think a lot of people might not know the name of. I think Isaiah Bond has kind of taken a little bit of the shine away from Jonte Cook going into this offseason when he came over, but I think Jonte Cook might be the key to this offense. I think if he can get running and be the guy that Xavier Worthy was for Texas for so many years, or at least be somewhat of the person that Xavier Worthy was for these last couple of years, I think the sky's the limit for this Texas offense. So very excited to see what he can do. And then finally, Jaden Greathouse, the wide receiver at Notre Dame, someone that is very talented, a physical receiver in a lot of ways, can do a number of things incredibly well, line up all over the field because of his stature. And in my opinion, when I was watching Notre Dame throughout last year and, seeing them kind of struggle at times and different things, I think they just put too much on his shoulders. I think him and Mitchell Evans were really the only options in the passing game. Obviously, they had guys like Tobias Merriweather and Colsey and very good players, no doubt about it. But I think there was a little bit too much put on his shoulders to be the main guy as a freshman, and that's always tough. But Notre Dame has done a ton of really, really good things, bringing in Riley Leonard instead of Sam Hartman. Obviously, Sam Hartman did plenty good at quarterback for Notre Dame a year ago. And they're hoping that Riley Leonard can be that kind of facilitator figure that Sam Hartman was just last year. And then adding transfers Chris Mitchell from Florida Atlantic and Florida International. Yes, Florida International, excuse me. And Bo Collins from Clemson, I think, helps a ton to allow Greathouse to kind of be him and reach his potential, because it was a little bit tough for him to get open at times last year. But obviously, much more breakout players that we will get to throughout this process. That is not the last edition of this. That is just part 2. I'm sure there will be a part 3, 4, 5. So we will get into a ton more guys. Let me know if you have any guys that you want to see in the comments, and I will definitely break those down. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us here at the channel. Also, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter or X, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for every content and updates that you could possibly need. We have so many people around the company doing incredible things around every sport you could think of. So definitely check out all those channels to get all those updates and follow us along, because it's going to be a really fun journey. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my